Some secrets are meant to protect us. Others nearly destroy the people we're trying to save. I never thought I'd spend my first date with someone pretending I couldn't walk, but there I was, seated in my wheelchair at Riverside Park in Cedar Falls, watching Julian approach with wildflowers he'd picked himself, and knowing that everything about this moment was built on a lie. My name is Lorelei Ashford. To most people, I'm the 32-year-old CEO of Ashford Medical Technologies, a company my grandfather started in a barn 50 years ago that now develops accessibility devices for people with mobility challenges. To the 1,200 residents of Cedar Falls, I'm just Raymond Ashford's granddaughter who moved back home after he died, the one who took over the old factory on Elm Street and somehow kept it running. But to Julian Reeves, the man walking toward me with dirt still under his fingernails from his morning at the community garden, I was someone completely different. Someone broken. Someone who needed saving. I hadn't meant for it to happen this way. 6 weeks earlier, I'd rolled into Maggie's diner in my wheelchair after a long day of physical therapy. I'd been in an actual car accident 4 months prior, fractured my spine, spent 3 months relearning how to walk. My doctors in Chicago had cleared me, said I was healing beautifully, but I still used the chair when my back ached or fatigue set in. Old habits, safety nets. Julian had been there, sitting alone at the counter, sketching something in a worn notebook. When I struggled to reach the napkin dispenser, he'd helped without making it feel like charity, just one human helping another. We'd talked for 2 hours about everything except what I did for a living or why I was in that chair. He told me about his organic farm, about losing his wife to cancer 3 years ago, about his 8-year-old daughter, Piper, who wanted to be a veterinarian. He never asked what happened to me, never stared at my legs with pity. He just saw me. When he asked for my number, something inside me fractured worse than my spine ever had, because I knew what would happen when he learned the truth about who I was. I'd watched it happen a dozen times before. Men who seemed genuine suddenly becoming interested in my bank account instead of my thoughts. Women who wanted to be photographed at charity galas, not share coffee at dawn. So when he called and asked me to dinner, I said yes, and I didn't correct him when he asked if the Riverside Park was wheelchair accessible. I told myself it was just easier this way, that I'd tell him eventually, that one date wouldn't hurt anyone. I'd been lying to myself for weeks. Now Julian was here, kneeling beside my chair so we were eye level, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. He'd brought a whole picnic, spread a blanket on the grass, positioned everything within my reach. He'd thought of every detail to make me comfortable, and I'd thought of every detail to deceive him. Julian had chosen a spot beneath the old willow tree where the Clearwater River bent eastward, creating a natural alcove that caught the late afternoon sun. He unpacked his basket with the careful attention of someone who'd been planning this for days. Homemade sourdough bread, local honey from the Henderson's apiary, fresh strawberries that still smelled like summer earth. "Piper helped me pick these this morning," he said, holding up the strawberries. "She made me promise to save her the biggest one so she could hear all about our date." He paused, a flush creeping up his neck. "Is that weird that my daughter knows about you?" "It's sweet," I said, and meant it. The truth was, I'd been thinking about Piper too, about how Julian's face transformed when he talked about her, how he lit up describing her science fair project on soil composition. He settled onto the blanket, close enough that I could smell the cedar soap he used, and began slicing the bread. His hands were steady, calloused from farm work, marked with old scars that told stories of hard labor and honest living. These weren't the soft hands of boardroom executives I usually dealt with. These were hands that built things, grew things, nurtured life from soil. "I've been wanting to ask you something," Julian said, spreading honey on a piece of bread, "and you can absolutely tell me if I'm overstepping." My chest tightened. Here it comes, I thought, the questions about my condition, the carefully worded inquiries that were really about limitations, dependencies, future complications. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked instead. I blinked. "What do you mean?" He set down the bread, his gaze drifting to the river. "After Sarah died, I thought that was it for me. We'd had our love story, and it was beautiful, and nothing could ever come close to what we had. My sister kept telling me I was too young to give up on companionship, but it felt disloyal somehow, like moving forward meant forgetting her." "You don't have to explain," I started, but he shook his head. "I want to. Because meeting you changed something in me, Lorelei. That day at Maggie's, you were reading this medical journal, completely absorbed, and when I asked what you were working on, you explained spinal nerve regeneration research like you were telling me the most exciting story in the world. You never once acted like I wouldn't understand. You just shared your passion." Guilt twisted in my stomach. He thought I was reading that journal as a patient, hoping for my own recovery. I didn't know I'd been reviewing research proposals for my company's next development phase. Sarah used to do that, share her world without dimming any of its complexity. She was a botanist, could talk for hours about mycorrhizal networks and soil microbiomes. Most people's eyes would glaze over, but I loved watching her come alive when she talked about her work. "She sounds remarkable," I said softly. "She was, and so are you." He looked at me then, really looked at me, with an openness that made my carefully constructed walls feel paper thin. "I'm not trying to replace what I had. I don't think that's possible. But I'm starting to believe that maybe hearts are bigger than we think, that maybe there's room for new chapters even after we thought the book was closed." I should have told him right then. Should have said, "Julian, I need to be honest with you." But the words stuck in my throat because part of me desperately wanted this. Wanted to be Lorelei, who met a kind man at a diner, instead of Lorelei, the CEO, whose relationship attempts always ended in disappointment. "I believe in second chances," I finally said. He smiled, relieved, and handed me the bread with honey. "Good, because I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up somehow." "You're doing fine," I assured him, taking a bite. The honey was incredible, floral and complex. This is perfect. We fell into easy conversation as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Julian told me about his farm, how he'd converted 5 acres of his family's old tobacco land into organic vegetable plots, how he sold at the farmer's market every Saturday, and how Piper had her own small stand where she sold herb sachets she made herself. "She's got a real entrepreneurial spirit," he said with obvious pride. "Last month she negotiated with old Mr. Fletcher to let her use his lavender in exchange for helping weed his garden. 8 years old and already understanding fair trade." I laughed, imagining this miniature negotiator. "She sounds formidable." "She is. Takes after her mother that way." He reached for the thermos he'd brought. "Sarah never let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. When she got her diagnosis, the doctors gave her 6 months. She made it 3 years through sheer stubbornness and determination." He poured what looked like homemade lemonade into 2 mason jars. The late afternoon light turned it golden. "The last year was hardest on Piper," he continued, his voice quieter now. "She was only 5, didn't fully understand why her mom kept getting weaker. I tried to explain, but how do you tell a child that their whole world is about to change forever? You can't. You just hold them through it." "Exactly." He met my eyes. "You get it. Most people want to fix things, offer solutions, but sometimes there is no fix. Sometimes you just have to sit with the hard truth and find a way to keep breathing." I thought about my own hard truths, about my grandfather's death 2 years ago, how he'd left me his company and his legacy and the weight of an entire town's economic survival, about the accident that had forced me to confront my own mortality and limitations, about sitting in hospital rooms realizing that all my success meant nothing if I had no one to share it with. But I didn't share any of that. Instead, I let Julian think my understanding came solely from my presumed disability, from whatever tragedy he imagined had put me in this chair. The deception was growing heavier by the minute. "Can I ask you something now?" I said, needing to shift the conversation. "Anything. What made you want to have dinner with me? Really?" He smiled, a slow, genuine thing that reached his eyes. Honestly, the way you didn't need me to feel sorry for you. You were just living your life, reading your journal, completely self-possessed. And when we talked, you asked real questions about my dreams for the farm, about what keeps me up at night, about whether soil health could be the answer to climate change. He laughed. Most first conversations don't go that deep. Most people aren't that interesting, I countered. See? That's exactly what I mean. You're direct, genuine. In a world full of performance, you just are. The irony nearly choked me. Here I was performing the biggest deception of my life, and he thought I was genuine. Julian started unpacking the main course, a quinoa salad with roasted vegetables and grilled chicken he'd marinated in herbs from his garden. Everything was prepared with such care, placed in containers that were easy for me to reach. He'd thought about the logistics of eating while seated in a wheelchair, had arranged everything so I wouldn't have to strain or ask for help. The thoughtfulness of it made my chest ache. Piper actually helped plan this menu, he admitted, plating the food onto real ceramic dishes he'd brought wrapped in towels. She insisted we couldn't do anything with bones or shells because that would be complicated for Miss Lorelei. Her words, not mine. She sounds incredibly considerate. She's had to grow up faster than I would have liked. He handed me a plate. After Sarah died, Piper became almost protective of me. She'd make sure I ate breakfast, remind me to lock the doors at night. 8 years old, going on 30. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the river flow past. A heron landed downstream, its reflection perfect in the still water. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, and children's laughter carried on the evening breeze. "This is nice," I said quietly. "Just being here. No pressure, no expectations." "That's all I wanted. Just time with you." He reached for his water glass, took a sip, then grabbed a piece of the grilled chicken. I was telling him about a book I'd been reading when I noticed him pause mid-chew. His expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, but his hand moved to his throat. He tried to swallow, tried again. The confusion turned to concern, then to something that made my blood run cold. Fear. He was choking. Julian's eyes went wide. He tried to cough, but nothing came out. No sound, no air. His hands gripped the edge of the blanket, knuckles white. "Julian!" I leaned forward in my chair, my mind racing through the calculations I'd spent weeks maintaining. Stay in character, don't reveal yourself, but those thoughts lasted maybe half a second before instinct obliterated everything else. He stumbled to his feet, one hand clawing at his throat, the other reaching out blindly. His face was already changing color. I didn't think. I couldn't afford to think. I stood up from the wheelchair. The movement was so natural, so automatic, that I didn't even register what I'd done until I was already behind him, my arms wrapping around his torso, positioning my fist just below his ribcage. The Heimlich maneuver. I'd been trained in it years ago during a corporate safety seminar, had practiced on dummies, but never thought I'd need to use it. "I've got you," I said, and thrust upward. Nothing. Julian's weight sagged against me. He was taller, heavier, and losing consciousness. I adjusted my grip, planted my feet more firmly, and thrust again, harder this time. A chunk of chicken dislodged from his throat and flew onto the blanket. Julian gasped, a horrible, wet sound, then coughed violently. Air. He was getting air. I held him as he doubled over, coughing and gasping, my arms still around him, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. He was breathing. He was alive. It took me another few seconds to realize what else had just happened. I was standing. Had been standing. Had run to him, lifted him, saved him. And Julian, still catching his breath, still trembling from oxygen deprivation, was staring at the empty wheelchair 5 feet away. The world seemed to pause. The river stopped flowing, the heron froze mid-step, even the breeze held its breath. Julian straightened slowly, his hand still at his throat, his breathing ragged but steady. He looked at me, then at the wheelchair, then back at me. I watched the confusion in his eyes shift through a dozen emotions: disbelief, understanding, hurt, anger, and finally something I couldn't quite name. "You can walk," he said. His voice was hoarse, raw from choking, but the words were clear enough. I stood there, my arms hanging uselessly at my sides, every excuse I'd prepared over the past 6 weeks evaporating like morning fog. "Julian, you can walk," he repeated, louder this time. He took a step back from me, creating distance. "This whole time, you could walk." "It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," his voice cracked, "because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn simple. I thought you were paralyzed. I planned this entire evening around making sure you'd be comfortable. Piper and I picked a spot by the river because you mentioned loving water, but I assumed you couldn't hike to the falls. I made food that would be easy to eat from a seated position. He stopped, running his hair through his head. "God, I told you about Sarah, about loss and second chances and being genuine." The guilt that had been simmering in my chest for weeks finally boiled over. "I was in an accident 4 months ago. I fractured my spine, spent 3 months in recovery. The wheelchair isn't a lie, Julian. I still use it when my back gets tired, when the pain is too much. That day at Maggie's, I really did need it. But not today," he gestured at the chair. "Not for the past hour we've been sitting here. You just chose not to tell me." "I didn't know how," I said, hearing how weak it sounded even as I spoke. "That first day, you didn't ask questions, didn't make assumptions. You just treated me like a person. And when you asked me out, I thought—" "You thought what? That I wouldn't be interested if you could walk? That I was only attracted to you because I felt sorry for you?" The hurt in his voice cut deeper than any anger could have. "What kind of person do you think I am?" "That's not it at all." I took a step toward him, but he moved back. "Julian, please. Every relationship I've tried to have in the past 5 years has fallen apart the moment people found out who I really am." "Who you really are?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't even know who you are. I know your name is Lorelei, and I know you can apparently lie very convincingly, but beyond that," he shook his head. "Who are you? What do you do? Why would people care anything except whether you're a good person?" This was the moment I'd been dreading and avoiding and running from. "My name is Lorelei Ashford. I'm the CEO of Ashford Medical Technologies. We develop accessibility devices for people with mobility challenges. The factory on Elm Street, the one that employs half of Cedar Falls, that's mine. My grandfather left it to me when he died." Julian went very still. Ashford Medical, the company that just expanded last month, the one that created 50 new jobs. Yes. The CEO who donated the new accessible playground equipment to Cedar Falls Elementary, the one Piper's teacher wouldn't stop talking about because it meant kids like Tommy Herrera could finally use the swings. "Yes," I whispered. Julian sat down on the blanket, not gracefully, but like his legs had simply stopped working. He stared at the river, processing. I remained standing, afraid to move, afraid that any action would shatter whatever fragile threads still connected us. "So, the medical journal that day," he said slowly. "You weren't reading it as a patient hoping for recovery. You were reading it as, what, research for your company?" "We're developing a new spinal stimulation device. I was reviewing clinical trial proposals." I sat down too, but kept my distance, giving him space. "Everything I told you about the research was true. I just let you believe I had a different stake in it." "A different stake?" He laughed again, that same hollow sound. "You let me believe a lot of things, Lorelei." "I know." "Do you?" He finally looked at me, and the rawness in his expression nearly undid me. "I told you about Sarah, about how she never let anyone define her by her illness, how she hated when people treated her like she was fragile, and all the while you were sitting there pretending to be someone you're not, letting me make assumptions about your limitations." "I wasn't pretending to be someone else," I said, my voice breaking. "I was just trying to be seen for myself, not for what I own or what I can provide. Do you know what it's like to never know if someone wants you or wants access to your resources? No, he said bluntly. I don't. I'm a small-time organic farmer who lives in a 100-year-old farmhouse that still has the original plumbing. My biggest financial decision this month was whether to invest in new irrigation or wait another season. So no, I don't know what it's like to be wealthy enough that people want something from me. The class divide between us had never been more apparent. Here was a man who worked the soil with his own hands, who measured success in healthy crops and his daughter's happiness, and I'd patronized him with my deception. But I do know what it's like to be lied to, Julian continued, his voice quieter now. Sarah and we had our problems before she got sick. Normal marriage stuff, arguments about money and time and whose turn it was to handle the hard conversations, but we never lied to each other. Even when the truth hurt, even when it would have been easier to pretend, we stayed honest. That's what got us through the hardest 3 years of our lives. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. You're right. You deserved the truth from the beginning. I convinced myself I was protecting something precious, but really I was just protecting myself from potential rejection. And in doing so, you rejected me, Julian said. You decided I wasn't worth the risk of honesty, that I couldn't handle knowing who you really are. You made that choice for both of us. The accuracy of his words hit like a physical blow. He was absolutely right. I'd been so focused on avoiding the pain of being used or dismissed that I'd never given him the chance to prove he was different. I saved your life just now, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to use that as leverage. I just mean that when it mattered, when you were in real danger, I didn't think about the deception. I just acted. The real me acted. I know, and I'm grateful. Truly, you saved my life, and I won't forget that. He stood up, began collecting the dishes with mechanical precision. But gratitude isn't the same as trust, Lorelei. I watched him pack up the picnic in silence, each movement deliberate and final. The strawberries Piper had helped pick went back into the basket, the mason jars of lemonade, the carefully prepared food we'd barely touched. He folded the blanket with the same attention he'd used to spread it out, but now the care felt like distance, like a man already removing himself from a situation. "Can I ask you something?" I said as he worked. "If I had told you the truth that first day at Maggie's, would you still have asked me out?" Julian paused, his hand stilling on the basket handle. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe I would have been intimidated. Maybe I would have assumed you were out of my league. Or maybe I would have seen you exactly the same way I did and asked anyway." He met my eyes. "But that's the thing about honesty, Lorelei. It doesn't come with guarantees. You take the risk because the alternative is building something on sand." "What we had wasn't entirely false," I said quietly. "The conversations, the connection, the way I felt when I was with you, that was all real." "I believe that," he said, and I heard the sadness in his voice. "But it was real for you knowing the full truth. It wasn't real for me. I was falling for someone who didn't exist in the way I understood her." The past tense wasn't lost on me. Was falling, not am falling. Julian picked up the basket, then looked at my wheelchair, still sitting where I'd abandoned it. "Do you need that to get back to your car?" "My back is okay right now," I admitted, "but I should probably use it anyway. Old habits." He nodded and brought it over, positioning it carefully. I sat down, not because I needed to, but because it felt like the least I could do was honor the truth now, even in small ways. We made our way back to the parking area in heavy silence. Julian walked beside me, not behind, not ahead. When we reached my car, a sleek hybrid that probably cost more than his annual farm income, I saw him notice it, saw another piece of the puzzle click into place. "I meant what I said about second chances," Julian finally spoke. "I do believe people deserve them, but second chances only work when the first chance was genuine." "So this is it?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. "We just walk away?" "I need time," he said, "to process this, to figure out if I can separate the person I was getting to know from the deception that framed it." He ran his hand through his hair again, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his tell when he was struggling. And honestly, Lorelei, I think you need time too, to figure out why you think so little of yourself that you have to hide who you are to be loved. The observation struck home. He was right. Again. For what it's worth, I said, meeting you reminded me that I'm more than my job title, more than my grandfather's legacy. You saw something in me worth knowing even when you thought I was just someone reading a medical journal at a diner. That person is still in there, Julian said, but she needs to trust herself enough to show up fully, not just when someone's choking. Despite everything, I almost smiled at that. He started toward his truck, then turned back. I hope your back continues to heal, and I hope your company keeps doing good work. Cedar Falls needs Ashford Medical. Julian, I called out as he opened his truck door. Thank you for tonight, for your honesty, for showing me what I was too afraid to give you. He nodded once, then climbed into his truck and drove away. I sat in my car for a long time after he left, watching the sun sink below the horizon, turning the sky orange and pink and purple. My phone buzzed with emails that needed responses, board member questions, vendor contracts, the machinery of my life demanding attention. But for the first time in years, I didn't immediately answer. Instead, I sat with the weight of what I'd lost and what I'd learned. Julian was right, I did need time. Time to understand why I'd been so certain that the truth would drive people away, that I'd never given anyone the chance to prove otherwise. 3 weeks later, I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. His name is Julian Reeves." My heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Send him in." Julian entered, and he wasn't alone. A small girl with dark braids and curious eyes held his hand, looking around my office with undisguised fascination. "This is Piper," Julian said. "Piper, this is Miss Ashford." "You're the playground lady," Piper exclaimed. "Daddy says you're the reason Tommy can swing now." I smiled, genuinely. Tommy should be able to swing. Every kid should. Julian cleared his throat. Piper had some questions about accessibility design for her science fair project. She wants to create adaptive gardening tools. I told her I knew someone who might be able to help, but only if that person had time. I looked at him, trying to read the subtext. His expression was careful, guarded, but there was something else there too. An opening, a possibility. I have time. I always have time for important questions. Piper beamed and launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her project, complete with hand-drawn sketches she pulled from her backpack. As I listened to her ideas, I felt Julian watching me, seeing me as I actually was: CEO, inventor, mentor, person. When Piper paused for breath, I said, "These are brilliant ideas. Would you like to see our design lab? We have some prototypes that might interest you." "Could I really?" Piper's eyes went wide. "If your dad says it's okay." Julian nodded. That would be wonderful. As I led them through the facility, explaining our work and answering Piper's endless questions, something shifted. This wasn't a date or a deception. It was simply the truth, who I was, what I cared about, shared with people who might actually understand. When the tour ended and we returned to the lobby, Piper hugged me impulsively. "Thank you, Miss Ashford. This was the best day ever." After she skipped ahead to look at the lobby displays, Julian and I stood in the space between who we'd been and who we might become. "Thank you for bringing her," I said. "Thank you for being honest, for showing us who you really are. Are we?" I didn't know how to finish the question. "I don't know yet," Julian said, and I appreciated the honesty. "But I think it's a start. A real one this time." "A real one," I agreed. He smiled, small but genuine, and something in my chest loosened. Second chances, I was learning, didn't erase first mistakes. They simply offered the opportunity to build something true from the rubble of what came before. And sometimes, that was enough.